When officers inspected the inside of the drum, they found a charred body tucked inside. That horrifying discovery sent shockwaves straight through the community of Pampagrande. On the morning of July 21st, 2024, locals in Tumbes, Peru, stumbled upon a blue plastic drum, partially melted from a fire. But when they took a closer look, they realized what was inside the burned remains of a young woman, charred beyond recognition. Police quickly uncovered that just hours before, she'd been out spending the evening with a man. That tiny window of time became the starting point for a murder investigation that rocked the entire country of Peru.
Criminalística recolectaban todas las evidencias de la escena del crimen.
So how did all of this happen? And what piece of evidence eventually led the police straight to the killer? Hi Tracers, Sean here. It's been a minute since we covered a case that's truly disturbing, one that genuinely gives you chills. Today, we're heading to Peru to look at how blind jealousy and toxic obsession turned an ordinary Saturday night into a dark tragedy, one that claimed the life of a young mother and her unborn baby. Because you never know how deep this hole goes. In the northern region of Peru, on January 5th, 1998, a woman named Lady Alvarez Romero was born. Growing up in a warm, loving home, she eventually settled down in Pampagrande, a bustling, densely populated neighborhood in the city of Tumbes. Lady was the second child of Fanny Romero, well known among her neighbors as a friendly, warm-hearted woman who always had a smile on her face. Within her family, she shared an exceptionally close bond with her grandmother, who had been her go-to confidant ever since she was a little girl. Not much is publicly known about Lady's educational background. As she grew into adulthood, she lived a modest life in Tumbes while raising her firstborn daughter, who was around 4 years old in 2024. The identity of her daughter's father was never made public, leaving virtually no details about their past relationship or why they went their separate ways. Despite that, Lady poured all her heart into raising her daughter, working tirelessly to give her a better life. Sometime later, Lady met a 28-year-old man named Absalon Frank Urbina Capricorn. Early in their relationship, Frank came across as attentive and treated Lady with genuine care. That affectionate behavior made her feel safe, leading them to start dating. To anyone looking from the outside, they seemed like a bright young couple building a future together in Tumbes. In fact, by mid-2024, Lady was 4 months pregnant. She was expecting a baby boy, her second child, whom she was deeply looking forward to welcoming. But behind closed doors, things slowly began to shift. Once Frank felt secure in the relationship, his true colors started to show. He became intensely jealous, quick to anger, and possessed an explosive temper that was hard to control. Lady's family warned her multiple times to leave him, sensing early on that something was seriously off with Frank's behavior. Their concern turned into deep alarm when they discovered that he carried a dark criminal past. According to police records, Frank was no stranger to law enforcement and had actually been arrested for robbery with violence back in 2022 and again in 2023. Yet, despite repeated warnings from those who loved her, Lady chose to stay. Partly because she was carrying Frank's child, but also because she held on to hope that he might eventually change and become a better man. To the outside world, their relationship still looked perfectly fine. But to Lady's family, it had long ceased to be the happy union it pretended to be. In the middle of all this unspoken tension, Lady kept pushing forward with everyday life. She focused on raising her little girl, eagerly awaited the arrival of her second baby, and held out hope that brighter days were just ahead. Until finally, on the night of July 20th, 2024, all those hopes slowly faded away in a tragedy that would change her family's lives forever. On that Saturday evening, the neighborhood of Pampagrande was still buzzing with locals enjoying the weekend. At a local bar in downtown Tumbes, Lady Alvarez arrived with her boyfriend Frank. Like the other patrons, they spent the evening drinking alcohol. At the time, Frank was already heavily intoxicated while Lady only drank a small amount, mindful that she was 4 months pregnant. In the middle of the crowded bar, Frank suddenly burst into laughter by himself before locking eyes with Lady with an intensely sharp glare. Out of nowhere, he started accusing Lady of cheating on him all along. Lady tried to stay calm, telling him he was just speaking under the influence of alcohol and urging him to head home since it was getting late. But instead of cooling down, Frank's anger only escalated. He went as far as claiming that the baby Lady was carrying wasn't even his. Hearing those wild accusations, Lady immediately stood up for herself, denying every single baseless claim Frank threw at her. The argument grew increasingly heated, their voices rising until it began attracting the attention of other patrons in the bar. Embarrassed to be making a scene in public, Lady urged Frank once more to leave for home. This time, Frank didn't say a word. He just sat there in silence, clenching his fists tightly while his eyes burned with rage. Moments later, he finally stood up and stumbled toward the exit. Lady followed closely behind him. Exhausted from facing the same recurring arguments, she still did her best to hold back her frustration. After leaving the bar, they headed back to Frank's house in Pampagrande. Once they arrived, Lady grabbed a glass of water and drank it all down to sober up and clear her head. She then walked back into the living room, where Frank was still sitting on the couch. The menacing look on his face hadn't changed. Shortly after, Frank demanded to see Lady's phone. When Lady asked what he was looking for, Frank snapped back, accusing her of hiding all the evidence of her affair inside her phone. Knowing she had nothing to hide, Lady handed her phone over directly, telling him to check it himself. But suddenly, Frank refused to take it. To him, Lady's initial question was reason enough to treat it as a refusal. The argument exploded all over again, and this time, no one was holding back. In a blind fit of rage, Frank grabbed a kitchen knife and launched a relentless attack on Lady. Stab after stab rained down on Lady, giving her no chance to defend herself or escape. The brutal assault took Lady's life right then and there. Along with Lady, her 4-month-old unborn baby boy also perished from the attack. The heavy silence that settled over the house quickly turned into sheer panic. Lady's lifeless body lay in the living room while Frank frantically tried to figure out his next move. Instead of turning himself in or calling for help, he grabbed a large blue plastic drum from the back of the house. He shoved Lady's body inside, folding her frame tightly so he could seal the lid shut. Frank then lifted the drum onto a one-wheeled wheelbarrow to make it easier to haul out of the house. As dawn approached and the streets emptied out, Frank pushed the wheelbarrow down the quiet roads of Pampagrande toward Quebrada Santa Catalina, a secluded area frequently used as a dumping site. The journey was far from easy. Even with the wheelbarrow, the weight of the body forced Frank to exert all his strength, slowly pushing it through the dead, silent streets until he finally reached his destination. Once at the dump site, Frank tipped the drum over, doused the inside with gasoline, and moments later, set it on fire. The flames quickly roared to life, engulfing the entire drum, along with Lady's body inside. The intense heat caused the plastic drum to slowly melt, leaving Lady's body severely charred and nearly unrecognizable. Once he made sure the fire was burning strong, Frank turned around and headed back home. He was convinced that the fire would completely destroy her remains. Since he did all of this while the neighborhood was fast asleep, he believed no one would ever know what he had done. Back at home, Frank set to work cleaning up what was left of the crime scene. The pool of blood covering part of the living room floor was scrubbed down over the course of roughly 30 minutes, until the floor looked as if nothing had ever happened. With the cleanup complete, Frank went to rest, completely unaware that the fire he started would actually leave behind the exact trail of evidence investigators needed. On that very same morning, around 6:30 a.m. local time, residents began starting their daily routines. A foul, pungent stench of burnt material hung heavy in the air, drifting straight from the waste dump site in the area of Quebrada Santa Catalina. Driven by curiosity, several locals went over to investigate the source of the smell. Buried among piles of trash, they discovered a large blue plastic drum, scorched black and partially melted from an intense fire. When officers inspected the inside of the drum, they found a charred body tucked inside. That horrifying discovery sent shockwaves straight through the community of Pampagrande. Shocked neighbors immediately dialed emergency services, and within moments, news of the gruesome find spread across every corner of Pampagrande. onlookers began crowding the area until the site was completely swarmed. To secure the crime scene, local police taped off the perimeter before forensic teams arrived to begin identifying the remains. At that point, no one had any idea that the victim was Lady Alvarez, a woman who just hours earlier had been out spending the evening with her boyfriend. Officers from the Peruvian National Police alongside forensic experts arrived at the scene, their attention focused entirely on the drum. Inside, investigators confirmed that the victim was a female whose body had suffered severe carbonization. The extreme heat left her burned beyond immediate recognition. The entire area was sealed off to preserve physical evidence, while her remains were transported to the forensic facility for further examination. While the forensic identification was underway, investigators began tracing the origins of the blue plastic drum. They combed through security camera footage along the routes the killer likely took. In one key recording captured around 4 a.m. in the morning, a man was spotted pushing a heavy drum on a wheelbarrow heading toward Quebrada Santa Catalina. Frame by frame, investigators pieced together the trail, tracking the wheelbarrow's journey from the moment it left a residential home in Pampagrande all the way to the dump site. Later that same day, Sunday, July 21st, 2024, officers from the Peruvian National Police raided that exact residence. Inside, they found 28-year-old Absalon Frank Urbina still present. He was taken into custody without resistance. A thorough search of the property immediately followed. In several areas of the home, investigators uncovered faint bloodstains that had clearly been scrubbed down. Police also confiscated 2 kitchen knives linked to the murder, as well as the wheelbarrow used to transport the drum containing the victim's body. When first brought in, Frank vehemently denied any involvement in Lady's death. But once investigators laid out the CCTV footage, alongside the overwhelming physical evidence recovered from his home, he had no choice but to break down and confess. Meanwhile, forensic test results officially confirmed the identity of the victim. The body found inside the drum was indeed Lady Briled Alvarez Romero. Medical examiners also confirmed that at the time of her death, the 26-year-old was 4 months pregnant with a baby boy. The harrowing news quickly reached the public. Over the following days, hundreds of outraged locals and Lady's family members marched to the local police headquarters in protest. Holding banners high, they demanded the maximum penalty for Frank, viewing his crime not merely as murder, but as an act of senseless cruelty against a pregnant woman. Once the investigation was closed, prosecutors officially brought the case to trial. Court proceedings featured detailed forensic lab reports and DNA evidence that firmly corroborated the timeline built by investigators. Frank was formally charged with femicide, a crime defined under Peruvian law as the intentional killing of a woman driven by gender-based violence. Court proceedings featured detailed forensic lab reports and DNA evidence that firmly corroborated the timeline built by investigators. Nearly 2 years after the tragedy unfolded, in March 2026, the Criminal Court of Tumes finally delivered its verdict. The panel of judges found Absalon Frank Urbina guilty of the murder of Lady Alvarez and sentenced him to 25 years in prison. In their ruling, the court highlighted that his brutal actions not only took Lady's life, but also ended the life of an unborn baby boy who was his very own flesh and blood. Once the sentence became final, Frank was officially transferred to serve his term under the supervision of the Peruvian Penitentiary Authority. While the trial brought legal closure, for the Romero family, no verdict could ever truly heal the profound pain of their loss. Lady and her unborn baby will never return. Meanwhile, across Peru, Lady Alvarez's name remains etched in memory as one of the most high-profile femicide cases in recent years. Fanny Romero had to face the devastating reality of losing both her daughter and her future grandchild. At the same time, Lady's firstborn daughter, who is just 4 years old at the time, is forced to grow up without her mother. Beyond the courtroom walls, the family is left to pick up the pieces, enduring a void that no court ruling can ever fill. Lady Alvarez's story serves as a harsh reminder that relationship violence rarely happens out of nowhere. It almost always begins with possessiveness, extreme jealousy, and subtle forms of control until it escalates into an irreversible tragedy. Lady's story is a sober reminder that true love never gives anyone the right to possess, control, or hurt you. Spotting red flags early and finding the courage to reach out for help is crucial so that tragedies like this never happen again. What are your thoughts on this case, Tracers? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. And as always, if you're still watching this, maybe you're looking for the same thing I am.